So now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and I'm going to talk about race and policy and how policy has been implemented in racially disparate ways and how seemingly neutral policies have actually had a racialized effect on the American public. And I'm going to talk about four specific policy areas. Now, the racialization of politics has been discussed, policy has been discussed in many policy areas, but I'm going to focus on these four simply because they tend to be four of the most commonly spoken of policy areas when it comes to the issue of race. So, first, I'm going to talk about welfare. So, it might surprise a lot of people to know that overwhelmingly the majority of welfare recipients are actually white. Um, it actually, even when controlling for other factors, the American welfare state disproportionately services white Americans. And welfare used to be actually very popular in the United States. The modern welfare state really was first started in the aftermath of the Great Depression, through which, in order to aid in the economic recovery, the Roosevelt administration implemented myriad social welfare programs to offer administrative and economic assistance to citizens who had suffered economic loss as a result of the stock market crash of 29 and the subsequent Great Depression. However, public opinion really turned in the late 70s through the 1980s. This is largely to do with the fact that the Reagan administration launched a real restructuring of American political discourse that was skeptical of government and the administrative state, especially with regard to social welfare. Now, one of the methods by which the government did this was to instigate a lot of racial priming in its rhetoric with regard to social welfare. Now, I have linked this video about Reagan's efforts to do this. I couldn't fit it into this video, but I'm going to link it on the page that I post this video to. And it talks about Reagan's use of the image of what he called the welfare queen. It was this character that he sort of made up, this idea of this woman who has been living very lavishly simply by applying to a variety of welfare programs and did not have to work, did not have to earn her own salary because she was scamming apparently thousands and thousands of dollars from the public welfare programs. There's absolutely no evidence that this actually happened. And there is a figure in Chicago who claimed to have scammed thousands and thousands of dollars from social safety net programs. However, now, and that person might have been the person that Ronald Reagan was referring to. However, subsequent fact finding suggested that the individual who was actually mentioned in this video may have been claiming more so about her deeds of, scamming all this money than actually doing of it. It seems that she might have been talking the talk, but not actually doing what she said she was doing. But even aside from that, the political rhetoric, and especially the images that were used by the government, used images of African Americans, people of color, images of inner cities whenever it talked about social welfare programs. And because of that, the mass public got this idea that welfare was primarily benefiting African American communities, Latino communities, despite the fact that most welfare recipients are actually white. The next area of policy is law enforcement and the racial disparities that exist within that. Now, it seems like every other week we are seeing a new video of mistreatment of African Americans by law enforcement or by fellow citizens. Uh, and there's a long history of this, not only in conduct of law enforcement or of citizens, but there are systemic biases as well. Scenting disparities, for example. I have here two news clips from Tarrant County, Texas, which is close to Dallas, if you're unfamiliar. In the first clip on the left, a story about a Tarrant County judge who forged signatures on a petition to get his name on a ballot, forged hundreds of signatures with malice aforethought. The penalty that he got was he had to resign as a judge and then wasn't allowed to run. On the right is a news story about Crystal Mason, who was arrested for illegally voting despite the fact that she was legally barred from voting because of her felony conviction. Now, she was not aware of the fact that she was barred from voting because of her prior conviction, but nevertheless, it was discovered that she voted illegally and she was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Now, this is in the same county, and the nature of the crime in terms of voter fraud uh, are similar. However, the degree to which the judge engaged in fraud, many would argue, is much more um, calculated and ultimately much larger than accidentally voting illegally because you were unaware. And yet, the penalty for Crystal Mason was much more severe. Observers couldn't help but note that Crystal Mason is an African American woman, and though the picture is not provided in this clip, which is perhaps another example of racial biases, the judge in the case on the left was a white man. Now, there's also issues when it comes to guns, and I bring this up as an issue of gun control, not because gun control is an issue that is of particular importance to African Americans. I think there's an argument to be made that this is something that involves the whole public. But this is an example of when race can be completely left out of a conversation when it probably should be included and much discussed in the public discourse. And I'm going to show you this short video because I think this explains it better than I can. It's from a show called Adam Ruins Everything.